Let's bring in MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde, Rick Stengel, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs and an MS Now political analyst, and founder of and president of the Marks Collaborative, retired Major General James Spider Marks. David, the president had described some of the attacks the U.S. launched on Iran last night as love taps. What is CENTCOM describing them as?
They're describing them as sort of deadly fire that was in response to a deadly attack on American ships. It was 3 American destroyers. They were making their way through the Strait of Hormuz. It was an American show of force. Iranian forces attacked them. Either the missiles from Iranian forces missed or drones missed, or the U.S. was able to shoot them down. These destroyers are amazing. They have incredible radar systems that can literally see a bird flying in the distance. So that's a successful military operation, and then the U.S. retaliated and hit some bases on land and other locations where the Iranians were firing at the Americans from. That's a significant exchange of fire. To me, that is a violation of the ceasefire, but I think the president is so eager, critics say desperate, for a deal here that he keeps playing down these potentially deadly clashes between U.S. and Iranian forces.
David Rohde, thank you so much for laying out the very latest for us. Rick, the president did acknowledge that Iran fired on 3 U.S. warships transiting through the strait, and he wrote on social media right after, "We'll knock them out a lot harder and a lot more violently in the future if they don't get their deal signed fast." What does fast even mean? How long is the U.S. willing to wait?
Well, Anna, it's just another example of Trump's usual bluster and rhetoric, thinking that he's going to get a deal because he's using such exaggerated talk. David's point that our retaliation, there's kind of been an understanding, I hope, between the two sides that, you know what, we're going to retaliate, but not to such an extent that it will blow up the talks. We've seen that with Iran before. But, both sides are kind of desperate for a deal. And I do think that the negotiations, in a way, what we have seen is when you're negotiating, you can't come to an agreement. You either make it bigger, you either make it smaller, or you kick the can down the road. And basically, that's the third option is what they're doing. They're kicking the can down the road. They're going to say, look, we haven't come to an agreement yet about Iran's nuclear capacity. We're going to negotiate on that for the next few months. Both sides, it's in the interest of both sides to make a deal, and that's why they're going to postpone deciding on some aspects of it.
General, according to the Washington Post, a confidential CIA analysis finds Iran can survive the U.S. naval blockade for at least 3 to 4 months before facing more economic hardship, citing 4 people familiar with the document. And this assessment also finds Iran retains a substantial missile and drone arsenal. Does that surprise you?
Well, it doesn't at all. The fact that Iran has continued to be incredibly resilient, demonstrated this level of resilience over the course of the last 2 months, should not be surprising. Again, I think the United States established an expectation of what would occur as a result of Epic Fury that really extended our abilities to achieve that objective. On the military side, we've achieved some significant objectives, but I think we've learned a lesson at this point that additional firepower against Iran, in other words, a resumption of Epic Fury phase 2 now, is not going to move the negotiations any place closer or get us together to some type of an off-ramp. Clearly, I think, to answer your previous question, I think what Trump would love to do is walk into the room and see Xi next week, shake his hand and say, oh, just FYI, I've got a deal with Iran. Whether that deal is enforceable, almost irrespective of what it looks like. But if Iran and the United States have a deal, then we can walk down the path and start to address the significant issue, which is highly enriched uranium. That has to take place. And then the reopening, and again, let's be frank, the straits are open for vessels that have insurance and they have a captain and an owner who's prepared to take that risk. It will happen, but it needs to get back opened again. So it doesn't surprise me that this analysis from the CIA is saying, look, we in the CIA who have looked at this thing for decades, the regime in Tehran, these guys are going to shoot us the bird as long as they can. They are going to remain in power until the last man standing. The United States cannot do that. If we're where we are today in a number of months, let's say into August or September, and we're on the brink of a global recession, we have to be, and I think we're very mindful of that.
So, Rick, given this CIA assessment suggesting Iran can withstand a lot more pain and they can hold off if the U.S. has a blockade for more months, in fact, and given other reporting that U.S. military assets were more severely damaged by Iran than the administration has let on, what does that mean for the kind of leverage Iran might have in any negotiation?
Well, they do have leverage, Anna. I mean, Iran's calculation from the start was we can withstand more military pain and more economic pain than the U.S. can withstand economic pain. That they're witnessing that all the time. They've had sanctions against them for 20 years and have suffered. I would always count on a people who have an existential threat against them, who have had to live, with very little to outlast it. Plus, it's an authoritarian regime. They're willing to sacrifice the livelihoods and the well-being of their people in order to get what they want. So, and again, I just also want to bring in, to your last question. I mean, the intelligence community basically has been pretty accurate about Iran's capabilities, and it doesn't surprise people like the general. It doesn't surprise, people in international policy. You know who it did surprise? It surprised the White House. The White House didn't think that Iran was that resilient. They didn't understand why Iran attacked the other Gulf countries to kind of try to separate them. So it's coming as a surprise to President Trump and his close advisors, and that's not a good sign.
And General, the UAE says it intercepted more missiles and more drone attacks today, and it comes after Iranian officials blamed the UAE for reported strikes in southern Iran. What could strained relations between these neighboring countries mean for the war going forward?
Well, the GCC nations really have realized at this point that their security is based on what the GCC sees as existential. Clearly, the United States will remain a part of the Gulf Cooperation Council and those relationships. But I think what we might be seeing is a bifurcation within the GCC. Maybe the UAE and Israel might create one bloc, and they've got a pretty tough view toward their relationship with Iran. And again, let's be frank, all of those GCC nations, irrespective of some of their now additional motives, have always been isolating Tehran for the longest time. But with the UAE and Israel, then you have another bloc, which really includes Qatar and Saudi and maybe Pakistan outside of the GCC and Turkey, NATO partner. And that alliance and they have a good relationship with Tehran historically. So that alliance of nations within the GCC might be a moderating influence to Iran. And I think Iran would really like to be a part of the region and not be viewed exclusively antagonistically. But that's going to require a heck of a lot of behavioral changes on their part, because that's been their bulletin board from day one is we want to eliminate Israel and we want to eliminate the great Satan. And guess what? We're the Shia state, and we're probably not going to be very good friends with everybody else. I think moving forward with that potential moderating bloc, we could see some changes. Again, it's going to take some time, and they've got time, and we simply don't.
General Spider Marks, Rick Stengel, thank you both, and happy Friday.